Have you heard about the real-life Indiana Jones, whose search for the Holy Grail was funded by the Nazis? Did you know they might have frozen someone alive, leaving their bodies in a block of ice? Or what about Adolf Hitler's niece, who he loved to the point where he considered killing her? These are just some of the fascinating Nazi mysteries you'll hear about today. Number 1. It would be the world's biggest understatement if we were to tell you that Adolf Hitler had a bit of a temper. But was he so bloody ruthless that he'd kill a member of his own family? Sure, Hitler was human. He liked his dog. He was said to be fond of certain children, but no one is entirely monstrous all the time, which is why people have talked a lot about the banality of evil. His own nephew, William Patrick Hitler, who was born in Liverpool and later fought in the US Navy, talked about how ordinary his uncle could be at times. When William was in his 20s and his uncle was becoming the most powerful man in Germany, he often tried to get Uncle Hitler to do favors for him. He said Adolf was friendly for the most part, but a few years later he wrote a magazine story titled Why I Hate My Uncle. In it he wrote, "We had cakes and whipped cream, Hitler's favorite dessert. I was struck by his intensity, his feminine gestures. There was dandruff on his coat." He also said that Adolf lost his temper over the smallest of matters regarding his family. William said he was furious, pacing up and down, wild-eyed and tearful. He made me promise to retract my articles and threatened to kill himself if anything were written on his private life. So when dealing with his family, Adolf Hitler was what you might call a bit uptight. This brings us to his half-niece, Geli Raubal. Her father died when she was just a kid. After that, she went to live with her uncle Hitler, along with her mother and sister. Her mother became his housekeeper at his Munich apartment, while Geli and his sister spent the years living under the watchful eyes of Hitler. He was a kind of surrogate father to her, a role he took very seriously, as he would often be a bit too overprotective over what she'd get up to. She was like the daughter he never had. Then Uncle Hitler became the leader of the Nazi Party. He was arguably the most feared man in Germany. Large crowds cheered his name when he spoke at events. His rise to power also increased his possessiveness over Geli. One time she secretly dated his chauffeur, Emil Maurice. That possessiveness started to manifest itself more and more. Hitler had loved this man. He made him an honorary Aryan even though he had some Jewish ancestry. He trusted him with his life. But when Hitler found out he'd been getting it on with his niece, he hit the roof. You already know how family matters could ignite his temper of his, so he fired Maurice on the spot even though he still allowed him to be a member of the SS. As for Geli, Hitler never let her out of his sight again. If she went to a movie, he went with her. If she said she wanted to go for a walk in the park, he said, "Wait on, I'll get my coat." If she said she was going to shop, he said, "No, we're going shopping." As she got older, he basically kept her as a prisoner in his own home. Her mother later testified to this, saying he pretty much controlled every aspect of her life. Later on, she fell in love and wanted to get married, only for Hitler to say there was about as much chance of that happening as him becoming a pacifist and going to India to study yoga. Nonetheless, being the focus of so much attention from Hitler made her the envy of many other women in Germany who had their eyes on the powerful man. According to Vanity Fair, she became a bird in a gilded cage trapped within the stony fortress with an uncle twice her age. A man named Otto Strasser later said that he might have been one of the only men in Geli's life to ever have a date with her that was greenlit by Hitler. He later became an enemy of Hitler as he started working with American intelligence agencies. He once told a German writer about his one and only date at a ball with Geli, saying, "Geli seemed to enjoy having, for once, escaped Hitler's supervision. On the way back, we took a walk through the English garden. Near the Chinese tower, Geli sat down on a bench and began to cry bitterly. Finally, she told me that Hitler loved her, but that she couldn't stand it anymore. His jealousy was not the worst of it. He demanded things of her that were simply repulsive." We don't know how true this is, though. He worked with US intelligence, so perhaps he wasn't the most reliable source when it came to Hitler. Still, as much as certain factions might try to dehumanize Hitler as a monster, he certainly did commit some of the most monstrous things known to man. We imagine he wasn't the best guy to have a close relationship with. On September 18, 1931, Hitler and Geli got into an argument. She wanted to go to Vienna, and he wouldn't let her. He later went to a meeting, and when he returned, she was lying on the floor with blood leaking out of a bullet hole in her chest, Hitler's Walther pistol lying by her side. Hitler, of course, said he had nothing to do with it. That didn't stop his political opponents from smearing Hitler's image by proclaiming that he imprisoned the poor woman and how he might have been in a sexual relationship with her. The Münchner Post said that her nose had been fractured as if it had been in a fight. To those who were not Hitler fans, the widely accepted story was that Hitler had killed Geli in a fit of rage. The Regensburger Echo alluded to something else, saying Geli took on forms which obviously the young woman was unable to bear. But did he kill her? That's the question no one has ever been able to answer. Police said there had been no foul play. Hitler himself became profoundly depressed after the event, having to take time off from politics to recuperate at a lake house. and even kept her bedroom the way she had left it. According to the book The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, Hitler later said that Geli was the only woman he ever loved, but that compels us to ask if he had killed her because she was going to leave his tight embrace and fall in love with another man. He was, after all, as history has shown us, emotionally unstable. After that story in the Münchner Post tainted his name, he wrote a response, which was also published. In it, he said, "It is not true that I was having fights again and again with my niece, and that we had a substantial quarrel on Friday or any time before that. It is also not true that I was decidedly against her going to Vienna. I was never against her planned trip to Vienna. I also did not leave my apartment on September 18th after a fierce row. There was no row, no excitement when I left my apartment on that day." Nonetheless, his nephew, who we just told you about, later said, "When I visited Berlin in 1931, the family was in trouble. Everyone knew that Hitler and Geli had long been intimate and that she had been expecting a child, a fact that enraged Hitler. It's worth mentioning that the newspapers soon stopped printing anything about the scandal since they found themselves being sued by the Nazi Party. One reporter named Fritz Gerlich kept investigating, concluding that Hitler had indeed murdered Geli. In March 1933, he was about to publish what he knew when his office was raided by Nazi stormtroopers. He was beaten badly, and all of his files were burned. In July, the Nazis put a bullet in his head during the Night of the Long Knives. Over the years, the case has been investigated numerous times. One historian wrote, "Geli's sudden and apparent inexplicable death has challenged the imagination of contemporaries and later historians. Some people believe he might have actually killed her accidentally, or even that he hired someone to do the deed. Or, as some others speculate, was Geli actually madly in love with Hitler, and when she found out he was involved with another woman, she lost the plot. It might have been none of those things, we just don't know." As Vanity Fair wrote in 1992, perhaps Geli was his great love, and perhaps his first victim. Now for something equally as fascinating. Number 2. One of the enduring mysteries about the Nazis is, where did all that Nazi gold go? We know for a fact that the Nazis stole unbelievable amounts of gold during the war. On one day alone, March 12, 1938, the German Wehrmacht turned up at the Austrian Central Bank and emptied their vaults of around 100 tons of gold. But when the Allied bombers were making a mess of Berlin and Adolf Hitler was down in his bunker thinking about what the Allies would do to him once they got their hands on him, he gave the order to take the gold, billions of dollars worth in today's money, not to mention all the cash, jewels, silver, and valuable artwork, out of Reichsbank. He wanted it to be hidden, and perhaps one day someone would be able to recover it. We're talking about a lot of loot there. Things were stolen from all over Europe during the 6 years and 1 day of the war. We know that part of it was discovered by the Americans. One day in 1945, they looked down an assault mine in the village of Merkers, about 200 miles from Berlin. They could hardly believe what they were looking at. There were piles and piles of loot, money in various currencies, silver, precious jewels, art, and lots of Nazi gold. It's estimated that today what they found would be worth in the region of $8 billion. But as much as that seems, the Nazis had stolen a lot more than that. We know that the Soviets took a fair bit of Nazi loot when they arrived in Berlin. We know that the SS Colonel Joseph Spasil, on the orders of the Nazi elite, took a fair bit of gold and hid it, but we don't know where he hid it. We also know that some of it likely ended up buried in Lower Silesia in southwestern Poland. We know that the Nazis had spent a long time digging giant holes in that area big enough to fit small towns. What we've never really known is what the Nazis were going to do with those massive tunnels. Were they going to hide in them? Were they going to develop weapons down there? They could have done many things because we're talking about underground cities here, giant labyrinths that never seem to end. About 5,000 people taken from the Nazi concentration camps died building those tunnels, and they never had an idea about what they were building. To this day, we really don't know the true purpose of those projects. We do know that some folks who were later interrogated said they'd been told to hide gold, and we know that now and again, long convoys of trucks would head through town in this area. At that time, the Nazis told the local people that they'd be shot if they looked out their windows at the convoys. This is why treasure hunters have been scouring the hills and forests of Lower Silesia for decades. Some of them believe that hidden someplace is what they call the Nazi gold train. They think there could be about 300 tons of gold and other valuables on this train. While it sounds like something out of a movie, the hunt for the Nazi gold is taken seriously. Not too long ago, the mystery got even more exciting when a diary was found that had belonged to an SS officer named von Stein. On one page, von Stein wrote, "The remaining 48 heavy Reichsbank chests and all the family chests I hereby entrust to you. Only you know where they're located. May God help you and help me fulfill my assignment." It talked about the artworks of some of the most renowned painters in history. He mentioned 11 separate sites where the gold was buried, but not the exact locations. To this day, plenty of people believe that the Nazi gold train is down there somewhere, hidden under the soil, and if found, will no doubt become the largest discovery of hidden treasure in history. It's just a pity Indiana Jones is fictional, as he would be the right man to try to find it. Okay, this next mystery you might find absurd, but more than enough people have talked about it to give at least some credibility. Number 3. Was Adolf Hitler actually gay? That might seem silly to ask, given we talked about how in love he was with his niece. It might seem even more implausible when we tell you he had a relationship with his secretary Eva Braun, whom he married in his bunker just before the pair started playing around with cyanide capsules. Okay, was he bisexual then? Or maybe you might be thinking, why are you even talking about the possibility of him being gay? Good question. Let us explain something now. The so-called founder of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, died in 1939. He lived long enough to see his daughter get arrested and taken to the Gestapo headquarters for questioning. The Freuds were Jewish and understood how dangerous Hitler was. One day in 1938, his home and his publishing house was ransacked by the Nazis, and his passport was confiscated. John Cooper Wiley, who was an American diplomat in Vienna at the time, cabled the words "Fear Freud," despite age and illness in danger. Freud, a longtime cigar smoker and a big fan of cocaine, was dying of cancer. But what's important here is what he had long said about the unconscious mind. He believed humans have a subconscious where much is hidden. The repressing of their thoughts or urges can make us mentally ill. Many of our urges, he said, are sexual. So with homosexuality, perhaps some people repress their natural urges. In fact, they become so repressed that it makes them almost mad. Some of them might even become homophobic, as some little part of them knows their real urges and feelings. And so to overcompensate from the guilt, they go the other way. They hate what they are, so they hate others like them. Hitler was a rabid homophobe, so much so that he had homosexuals executed in large numbers. He had a high-ranking Nazi killed, Ernst Röhm, ostensibly partly because he was gay. Röhm was actually gay, but if that's why Hitler had him executed is another matter. He died in the bloody period we mentioned earlier called the Night of the Long Knives, when Hitler went on a killing spree of people he believed were about to overthrow him. Röhm was at the top of the list. Many Germans were shocked after hearing about 85 people who'd been executed in what we might call extrajudicial fashion. But Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine then went into overdrive, and the public kept hearing about how bad those 85 people were to the nation. This propaganda drive talked about sexuality and how homosexuality was wrong. Men loving men and women loving women was illegal in Germany at the time, but it had mostly been tolerated. After the Night of the Long Knives took place, the cruelty against homosexuals was ramped up several notches. It was a horrible time for people who'd done nothing but be attracted to someone of the same sex. Rumors did circulate in Germany about Hitler's secret life. Many years later, someone wrote the book Hitler's Secret: The Double Life of a Dictator. This was not a book written on the back of sketchy tabloid newspaper articles, but a well-researched tract written by a respected German historian. The book states that one of the main reasons for the Night of the Long Knives was that some Nazis had threatened Hitler, saying they would tell the world about his homosexuality. One of them was Ernst Röhm. The book points to documents that still exist today, suggesting Hitler was gay. One of the documents was written in 1915 by a man named Hans Mend. He wrote about the young Hitler's time on the Western Front during the First World War. The document reads, "At night, Hitler lay with Schmidt, his male whore." It states that Hitler and Schmidt were not just lovers but totally inseparable. The lawyer Erich Ebermeyer, who had access to Hitler's military files, once wrote, despite his bravery toward the enemy, because of his homosexual activity, he lost out on a promotion to non-commissioned officer. There are also police reports that state Hitler was being looked at by cops in Munich for his homosexual activities. If you're wondering how these files were never destroyed by Hitler when he came to power, a German general named Otto von Lossow said he took them from the police as a form of personal life insurance. If Hitler messed with him, he could just threaten the Führer with the release of the files. Did Hitler later try to repress his homosexuality? Is this why he hated gay people? Is this why tens of thousands of homosexuals were brutalized, tortured, and thousands executed at the hands of the Nazis? Did he really mean it when he said, "Homosexuality is actually as infectious and as dangerous as the plague"? A psychologist and a biographer of Hitler once said, "There is insufficient evidence to warrant the conclusion that Hitler was an overt homosexual, but it seems clear that he had latent homosexual tendencies, and it's certain that he worried a great deal about them." Number 4. During the pillaging rampage that the Nazis went on during the war, perhaps the most valuable thing they took was the so-called eighth wonder of the world, the Amber Room. This place wasn't so much a room as it was a giant jewel box. Covered in gold and engraved with precious stones and beautiful mirrors, it might fetch as much as $500 million if it could be sold right now. But it can't be sold because we don't know where it is. The original one, anyway, that was built in 1701 for the Charlottenburg Palace in Berlin, Prussia. And it later went to Berlin City Palace. It only stayed in Berlin until 1716, when the Prussian King Frederick Wilhelm I decided he'd make Tsar Peter the Great happy and give it to him. It wasn't exactly easy to move either. The room contained about 6 tons of amber. After the war broke out, the Russians were well aware that the Germans would likely steal the room. This is why they tried their best to move it, but it was so old at that point that removing it would destroy many of the amazing features. Still, they did manage to hide it, but it didn't work. The Nazis got most of it to Königsberg Castle in Prussia, only for Adolf Hitler to give orders to move all the loot from Königsberg. Later, the British RAF bombed the hell out of the city, and later still the Red Army marched in there and did their best to wreck it. And just like that, the Amber Room seemed to just disappear into thin air. It was never seen again, so we really don't know who got it. Did the Russians take it and not tell anyone? That's a possibility since they took all kinds of Nazi loot and didn't tell anyone about it. Decades later, Russia admitted to stealing some of the Nazi fortunes, but they've always said they didn't take the Amber Room. It's not as if people haven't looked for it. Teams of hunters have looked high and low for the room, just like they've looked for that Nazi gold train. The Amber Room might also be hidden in a tunnel someplace, but investigations into its disappearance have led some people to think it might just have been blown to pieces when bombs dropped on Königsberg Castle. So, it may have been taken by the Russians or destroyed by the Russians, or it could have ended up in one of those giant German bunkers. It might have also gone down with the ship bombed at the war's end. Now there's a reconstructed version of the room which cost the Russians millions of dollars to build. It's a dazzling piece of art, but we think we prefer the original. Now for another murder mystery. Number 5. The man in question was Otto Rahn. What happened to him is perplexing, to say the least. He was a fascinating guy whose work took him all over Europe looking for the Holy Grail. Yep, all that stuff in the Indiana Jones movie about Nazis being obsessed with ancient myths was based on truth. The story of the Grail goes back centuries to those early stories that were written about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. The Grail was a kind of cup that may have been used to collect Jesus Christ's blood as he was having a really bad day on the cross. One of the legends, written between 1191 and 1202, says that the Grail was given to someone at the Last Supper right before Judas snitched on Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. What's important here is that for centuries after, many people thought the Grail was real. If you could get your hands on it and drink out of it, you might be rewarded with eternal youth. That's the legend anyway. As you can imagine, more than a few folks have occasionally wanted eternal youth, including some members of the Nazi Party. Rahn was a believer, which is why he was headed to the mountainous Pyrenees region of France. He thought the Grail was buried there. Then the war broke out and one man rose to power alongside Hitler. He was the SS leader Heinrich Himmler, the guy who oversaw the Holocaust and was perhaps more powerful than Gestapo founder Hermann Göring and propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels. The Nazis were known for their belief in the occult, but the person really into all that strange stuff was Himmler. So when he learned that Rahn was looking high and low for the Holy Grail, he told him to carry on and gave him some funding. He also made Rahn a member of the SS. There was a problem though, and it wasn't a minor one. Rahn was homosexual, and despite the illegality of being gay in Germany, he was gay and proud. This made him being chums with Himmler difficult because Himmler was very openly anti-gay. Rahn also hated the Nazis. Of course he did. They hated homosexuality. But he also needed the cash. He once told a buddy, "What was I supposed to do, say no to Himmler?" The Nazis paid him to search for the Grail all over Europe, but they kept hearing that this guy was constantly being critical of them. Then enough was enough when he got drunk and was caught getting it on with another man. They arrested him and sent him to Dachau concentration camp. Sometime later, he sent a letter to the SS saying, "I must ask you to accept my immediate discharge from the SS. The reasons are of so grave a nature that I cannot explain them in writing." Nonetheless, the Nazi Party was a bit like a prison gang or the Italian Mafia. It was blood in, blood out, meaning it wasn't exactly easy to retire from the Nazi Party. Rahn became a free man, but the Gestapo wanted a word in his ear. It was then realized that he best go into hiding. Then on March 13, 1939, someone found him frozen onto a block of ice somewhere in the mountainous area of Austria. The question was, what had happened to him? This famed hunter of the Grail who would in time serve as inspiration for the Indiana Jones franchise. Did the Nazis, eternally embarrassed over the guy, take him out there and dump him so he would freeze to death? Or as many have said, the body was not Rahn's. Did the Nazis make that up so they could shoot him in the head and secretly bury him? One rumor says he was sent back to Dachau concentration camp and was beheaded just before the Americans liberated the place. On his death certificate, the words exposure and pneumonia were written. Yet another rumor says Ron was the orchestrator of his death. This one says that he faked his death and then went off to have some plastic surgery. This take on his life says he joined the diplomatic service and later became an ambassador to Iraq and then Italy. This is where he supposedly died in 1975, age 71. We rather like this version of the story. It's much better than turning into a human popsicle in the Austrian Alps with a bunch of homophobic Nazis trying to chase you down. Now you need to watch how Nazi Angel of Death finally got caught, or see what Hitler might have done if things had been different, and Hitler's plans for the world if he had won.